You're listening to the Femcast podcast, the podcast for women who are truly ready to drop the paralyzing perfectionism and self-doubt and just live their best hot mess life. Let's do this. This podcast is listener discretion advised for mature content and coarse language. Whatever. Hey you guys, what is up? Welcome back to the show. I am so excited and grateful to have you here, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. We're getting back into the infidelity, you guys, and we're talking about, should I stay or should I go? Can a relationship actually survive cheating or infidelity? And I've heard some very polarizing opinions on this. I'm going to be giving you my 2 cents today. I'm going to be sharing with you whether or not I think a relationship can or cannot survive infidelity, when it can, when it can't, and how to navigate the gray areas. And believe me when I tell you there's like a ton of gray area. It's all gray area with a little bit of black and white. Because you know what? There's always exceptions, and there's always, intricacies and nuances in every situation that isn't the same as the next. So you really have to just be able to, listen to what I share with you here. I'm going to be sharing from my own personal experiences and my take on everything. Take what you will, leave the rest, make sure you do what feels good to you in your situation, right? And of course, if you need it, make sure to seek out support like we talked about in last episode. Very, very, very important that you do not isolate yourself. It is a very slippery slope when you do that. Trust me, I know from experience. Okay. So let's dive right in. So this episode is for you if you're in a relationship where there has been some infidelity, or you suspect there's been some infidelity and you're trying to figure out what to do. Or maybe you're even wondering if you even have any options, because a lot of people feel like they don't even have options. Like, it's kind of like a one and done solution, right? But that's not always the case. So we're going to talk about it here today. So, as I mentioned in last week's episode, when I was cheated on, I stayed for all the wrong reasons, right? So, going back to the details of the story, I was oscillating from fighting for a confession, and let me tell you, I fought hard for that confession, which I never got, by the way, to then the other extreme, which was happy denial. Here's how I explain, and here's how that makes sense to me, and why now in retrospect, I understand why I was doing that. For me, fighting for a confession was almost like a righting of a wrong. Like if I could at least get a confession, I felt like I could move on from this. I could move on from what happened, and I believe that we could work towards healing together. But I needed to have that confession. And then, when I would fight for that confession, and I would, and believe me, when I say I would fight for this confession. And then I would, it would get so intense. We'd have these like eruptive blowouts, again and again. And then there was this fear that I was going to lose them. And then I would quickly go into happy denial, right? Trying to pretend that everything was okay, because at the end of the day, I was afraid to be without him. And that's what I narrow it down to. And that's why I think I was fighting so hard for that confession, because there was a part of me that believed that, listen, without that confession, I can't be here. Like, I can't go on with this. So you need to give it to me in order for us to be able to come back and rebuild. And I wasn't getting it. And so then it would push me into denial. And then I would try and live there as long as I could. And, each time got a little bit longer, but more and more feelings got repressed. And then they would come out again, and I would fight for that confession. Ultimately, whether I was in denial or whether I was fighting or confession, I was fighting to stay in the relationship because I was too afraid to let it go. Because I knew it was going to be painful, regardless of the reasons for leaving. Like, regardless whether or not I was justified or not, I knew it was going to be painful. I didn't want to really face what had happened. I didn't want to face that I was so wrong about him. I didn't want to face that he was intimate with somebody else and experiencing that level of intimacy with someone else. And my imagination would run so wild, it would make me want to vomit, I didn't want to believe that he could do this to me when I loved him and trusted him so much. And ultimately, I didn't want to face the fact that this was confirming a belief that I already held within myself, which was that I wasn't enough. And although for the longest time, for the last 7 years, this relationship had me convinced, oh, maybe I am enough. Maybe I am worthy. Maybe I am lovable after all. Boom. Actually, you're not. Well, this is how it played out. This is how it played out in my subconscious, right? Obviously I was, but that's not where my belief system was heading at the time. So, the most uncomfortable thing for me to do was leaving, because now I'd have to face my shit. Leaving meant I had to be in the realness that I didn't feel like I was good enough to be loved and to actually do the work around that. So I was doing anything and everything that I could to cling to this situation so that I wouldn't have to face that. Do you see, like, it makes so much sense now in retrospect, and I couldn't understand why. And this is also the reason why I think I wasn't telling anybody what was going on in our relationship. I was kind of pretending like everything was fine. I told very few people what was happening, but for the most part, the world thought we were like, the couple of the year, right? Because nobody had a clue what was going on behind closed doors, because I was so afraid to say it out. I was afraid to even say it out loud. Every time I said it out loud, I wanted to vomit, because I just couldn't deal with the fact that in acknowledging this, I knew something needed to be done, and that something, depending on which course of action we took, might be the end of the relationship. And I couldn't go there. I wasn't strong enough, you guys. And you know what? I give myself grace and forgiveness for that, because I could only do what I was strong enough to do at the time, So I knew that my struggle in this situation was, like I said, I knew that there was no coming back from this if there wasn't a confession. I needed that confession in order to really and fully come back from it. But there was no confession coming. And so I kept trying to fight for it. What I was feeling, the longer it went on, the angrier I got, the more hate and hurt and sadness and fear I felt, because now it wasn't just the cheating that was the problem. It was the lying and the gaslighting that followed, and the making me believe that I was crazy for thinking that he was cheating. I think that was the most painful part of all of it. And then I started to doubt myself. And that's where I say, like, isolating yourself, it's a very slippery slope. Now, I do say, if you're going to confide in people, don't confide in the friends that are constantly going to bash him and gang up against him. And, you want somebody who's unbiased, who has their head on straight, and who can be objective, But I mean, the isolation and just like I can remember like mentally tripping in my mind, and it was like a circus in there, you guys. It was like, oh my God, he cheated. Oh my God, I can't. I would visualize it, and it would come in. It would come into my mind like a rush, like a movie screen, where I would literally see, situations playing out, and then I would feel sick to my stomach, and then I would put it away, and then I would go about doing what I was doing, whether it was laundry or grocery shopping or whatever. And I would put it out of sight, out of mind, and I would pretend everything was good, and I would be happy, and I would go about my normal life. And it was exhausting, to be quite honest. And like I said, whatever hate, anger, hurt, sadness was there in the beginning when the cheating initially happened was now compounding with the fact that I was being repeatedly lied to, repeatedly gaslighted, and repeatedly unacknowledged with what I was experiencing or going through. I was crazy for even thinking it, and out of line for even bringing it up and talking about it. So it was building, and it was building really fast, and I wasn't talking to anybody. So I was keeping this all inside. And then that's where I say isolation, slippery slope. Don't do it. So, and here's what I was thinking the problem was, right? So I've heard the common perspective. Once a cheater, always a cheater. If he cheats, once and out. Like, no room for compromise, conversation, negotiation, nothing. Like, cheated, done, end it, right? There's that extreme. And then there's the other extreme where, anything can be worked out in a relationship, blah, 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 which, to a certain degree, I do believe that anything can be worked out in a relationship if both parties want to work at it. Oftentimes we hear, oh, no, there's always work in relationships. You have to just do the work and blah, 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 and stick to it and make things, move through the difficulties and make things right again. Well, that's great, but both parties have to want to do it. And I mean, really want to do it, not just say they want to do it. They have to really want to do it. Okay. So I think the reason, I was struggling so much, I was always the one to believe never stay after cheating. And so the situation was like, fuck, this is actually like making me want to leave now. And I don't want to. And I don't want to face that. And I don't want to go down that road. But without a confession, it was really hard for me to move past what had happened. It made it impossible for us to do the work to repair the damage that had been done, to rebuild the trust. How do you rebuild trust when someone's still lying to you? Like, it's impossible to rebuild trust when somebody is still lying to you. Like, flat out impossible to do, especially when they're telling you that you're the crazy one, right? And then on the other hand, I didn't have a smoking gun. Like, I didn't actually catch them in the act. So for me, like, I'm very black or white like that. If I don't see you with a smoking gun, there's always that glimmer of, what do they call that in the courtroom? Anyway, glimmer of doubt that, oh, maybe you are innocent, right? Maybe just a little bit. Maybe there's a 1% chance that you actually are innocent. And I would cling to that like there was no tomorrow. And then part of me believed, well, without the smoking gun, I really can't leave, because then it's just an assumption on my part, which in my defense, like, it was not an assumption. Like, it was obvious that there was cheating happening, like, so obvious. So the fact that I actually needed hardcore evidence, like to catch him in the act with someone, boggles my mind. Again, it goes back to that lack of self-trust, right? Without concrete evidence of what I knew to be true and happening in my relationship, I couldn't trust myself to take action. There was always that little glimmer of doubt, that little glimmer of hope, that 1% that maybe this was all a bunch of circumstantial evidence thrown into the mix that made it seem almost guaranteed that he was cheating on me, and I clung to that so deeply, but it never really worked. And so the damage wasn't being repaired. If anything, it was getting worse. The anger was getting worse. The hurt was getting worse. The resentment was getting worse. It was all getting worse. And the rage that I felt was getting worse. And the dreams that I was having were getting more and more intense every single day. And eventually I got tired of fighting for that confession because it became exhausting. And then I just ended up parking it in happy denial for the longest time. So what ended up happening was, there was a period where our fighting got really intense. And then, like I said, I couldn't deal with the fear of losing him. And then we had a whole bunch of other stuff come into the mix. And so I just went into happy denial and I just kind of parked it there. But the dreams continued. And then finally, there was a massive, massive blowout. And I mean massive. And it had been building for months, and I kind of saw it coming. But again, I didn't want to look at it. But finally, it was that nudge that I needed. Like I talked about in the last episode, it was like in that moment, it was like an off switch was flipped. Suddenly, everything was gone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel resentment, but I also didn't feel love, and I didn't feel joy, and I didn't feel connection. I was done. I was checked out of the relationship already. And it was a few months later when it finally ended. And looking back, hold that thought, you guys. We're going to come right back to it. But before we do, I have a little something for you. Are you stuck in a perpetual pattern of its complicated or unfulfilling relationships because you're too afraid to ask and hold out for what it is that you really want? Are you watching life pass you by as you abandon all your own needs, goals, and desires for the sake of giving center stage to your relationship in the hopes that it will one day do the same for you? Do you feel like you're constantly saying yes when what you really want to say is no, leaving you feeling burnt out, emotionally exhausted, and depleted? And let's not even talk about that secret stash of Oreos that you've got in your top drawer, honey. I see you. What would it feel like to be in a healthy, loving, and committed relationship where you finally receive all the love and support that you give so abundantly to everyone else? If any of this is resonating with you, then come join me for a free 21-day radical self-love challenge. Each day we'll dive deep into practices that nurture your mind, body, and soul, empowering you to rewrite your love story on the inside so that you can experience more love on the outside. You'll learn some of my most powerful self-love tips and techniques designed to help you glow from the inside out and become a magnet for the love that you've always known you deserved. So if you're ready to finally say goodbye to self-abandonment and say hello to more loving and fulfilling relationships, come join my free 21-day radical self-love challenge. You can find the link to register in the show notes below. Remember to love yourself the way that you want to be loved, and I promise you, you will be. Now let's get back to today's episode. Would I have done things differently? Yeah, I would have. Obviously I would have done the work. I would have made the adult decision to leave, as painful as it was. I would have gotten the support that I needed at the time to do the work, to move through all those feelings of discomfort and all those beliefs of not enoughness and not being able to trust myself, and, had been able to come out stronger and better on the other side. I did what I could. I wasn't as self-aware at the time. I hadn't, my journey to personal development was only just beginning after this relationship ended. So I had no idea. All I had was what I had seen in the relationships around me, which, weren't always, the best examples either. So I did the best I could with what I knew. So you know what? I forgive myself for that. And I should have left a lot sooner than I did, 7 years, after, that I left. And that was 17 years, way too long and way too painful. I would never in a million years do that again, but I know why. I understand why I did it then. Now, before we get into the reasons why I would have left, let me give you sort of my take on relationships and infidelity. And how do you know when it's time, whether or not you should stay or leave, right? Because there is a decision to be made, regardless of what people will tell you. You have power to make a decision, right? You have the power to make a decision that is aligned for you and your specific situation, and never let anybody take that power away from you, right? Here's how I would navigate that, and kind of what things that you want to consider when making that decision, right? Is it a one-off situation, or is it a recurring issue? Is this person, was this the first time this person's ever cheated, right? Is this the first time they've ever effed up? Was it a one-night stand? Has it been a long-standing relationship they've been having? All these things factor in, right? If this person has had a habit of, having side chicks, right? Whether with you or with other people, if he's always been like a serial cheater, if his last relationship ended because he cheated, guess what? Like, these are all red flags, right? But like, if he's had obviously that means he's got a pattern of doing this. You want to be able to look at that specifically. Then there's the question of how serious is this situation? Has he been having a long-term affair with this person? Was it just a fling, a one-night stand? What are the parameters that you're dealing with here? Like, really look at it, right? Because there is a difference between physical infidelity and emotional infidelity, as far as I'm concerned, right? Physical infidelity is one of those things, we're all human. We all make mistakes. Everybody has a weak moment, right? If it's a weak moment, I do believe you can come back from that, and I do believe you can do the work. This guy's gone and fallen in love with somebody else, or buying someone else gifts, or taking someone else away on weekends. Then you've got a serious fucking issue, right? Now he's emotionally, I'm not going to say committed, but emotionally attached to somebody else. And that is a very slippery slope, right? Unless there has to, and I'm not going to put any black or white on this, but maybe he gets emotionally involved and physically, but maybe he has a moment where he comes to his senses and he's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. And no, now, like, when you have that moment when, you take someone for granted, you have this thing with someone else, you think they're all like rainbows and roses, and then you're about to lose that person. Then you realize how much they actually fucking meant to you. And maybe that person that you're having that rose-colored glasses relationship with didn't mean so much in the big picture. Maybe there was other issues in the relationship that led to cheating. And let me tell you, there are relationships that lead to cheating. There are situations within relationships and dynamics that will lead to cheating, and both parties have to take accountability for that. So, what was going on in the relationship when the cheating happened? That's another very important question. Were you in a good place? Were you not in a good place? Were you disconnected? Were you spending time together? How was your communication? How was your level of intimacy? All these things play an important role. And that's not to put blame on the victim. Like, we're not victim blaming here, but let's look at the situation, from, a balanced and lens of a balanced lens, a lens of self-awareness and understanding, okay, well, what co-created this experience between us, right? So that's really important to look at. You also want to look at, again, going back to my situation specifically, is there ownership or remorse? Honestly, in my situation, it was clearly an ongoing thing that he was having with this side chick, and I suspect she wasn't the only one, but that's an assumption. That I will say is an assumption. But she's the one that I know of for sure, and it had been going on for quite some time. It was pretty gross, to be quite honest with you. So there was definitely physical infidelity and emotional infidelity there. Like, there was attachment there. This went on for quite some time. And I think that, looking back, had there been ownership, because he was fighting to stay in the relationship with me. Like, he wasn't trying to end things. Like, he wanted our relationship to, to continue. He didn't want to end things. He was fighting to keep us together, but at the same time, he was entertaining this other chick. So that to me is just a whole other level of mindfuckery, but whatever. I think eventually it did end when things got really intense between us. And there was, I think, a moment where, we nearly ended. And I think that kind of made him look at the situation a little bit differently. And I think he kind of took a step back from it, that other dynamic, the side chick. However, I needed the ownership and the remorse, right? I needed to own my part in what had happened, which I wasn't very emotionally, what's it called? I wasn't emotionally developed enough to actually be able to do that, I don't think. But I really needed him to own his part that he had cheated. I needed him to own up to it, and I needed him to show some remorse. Otherwise, I couldn't come back from it. Right. And I think that there needs to be that ownership and remorse on both sides. Right. And I think that if both parties can come to the table and actually own their part and be remorseful about what happened, and really and truly stand behind the commitment that they made to the relationship and be willing to, go the extra mile to repair the damage. And that's really the next thing, is the willingness to do the work to repair the damage, to rebuild trust by both individuals, because it's going to take effort from both sides. So if both sides aren't owning what happened, if both sides aren't owning their part, if both sides aren't, being honest about what they're feeling emotionally, or showing some sort of, a remorse over what happened, if they're both not willing to do the work to repair the damage that has been done, and to rebuild the trust in the relationship, then there's no point in continuing. And then lastly is the relationship a safe zone where both parties can express their feelings truthfully, And that typically operates with, good communication and emotional maturity, which we did not. Emotional maturity was not in our vocabulary. Okay. So I recognize that now. So, these are kind of like the guidelines, right? These are the things that you want to look at. These are the things that you want to assess. So if you're in a situation and you've just been cheated on, and if that's you, I love you. And I'm giving you the biggest hug right now because I know how painful it is to experience that. And a lot of times the reasons why, and I will say this, the reasons why it is so painful when somebody cheats is because there is that underlying belief that we're not good enough. We're always going to be rejected and abandoned. And it's perpetuating and confirming that narrative, right? And that's why it's so painful. And that's why we try to cling and attach to these relationships, because it soothes that core wound that we're not enough and we're afraid of being abandoned and rejected because of that, right? So if that's the case, absolutely, hit me up. You know what to do. The link's below. But if you're trying to just decide whether or not this relationship is for you, these are the things I would look at. Is this a one-time occurrence, or does this happen again and again and again? Is this guy like a socio cheater, whatever you want to call it? Is there ownership? Is there remorse? Is there a willingness to do the work to repair the damage? Is there a willingness to do the work to rebuild trust? And the rebuild trust one, guys, takes time. That takes time and commitment. So think about that. Is it a safe zone where both parties can express their feelings truthfully and honestly and openly, and where there's typically good communication and emotional maturity? That's not to say that there's never fighting. Of course, there's going to be fighting, of course. But if you can't have like a good communication, difficult conversations with emotional maturity, then it's going to be really hard for you to navigate in this playing field, right? So these are the things that I would say are the things that you need to consider, right? So having said all of this, if I knew then what I know now, would I do things differently? Abso-fucking-lutely I would, because I will tell you why. Like I said, number one, this was a pattern, right? And I didn't realize it until much later, but this was a pattern. And this was a relationship that, this side chick was not like a one-time deal where he just kind of, in a moment of weakness kind of slipped up. This was an ongoing thing that he kept deceiving me on again and again and again and again, and then deceived me after it ended that it never happened. So a lot of mindfuckery, a lot of twisting of the truth, a lot of gaslighting. That is toxic behavior. Bye-bye. That's number one. Number two, there was no ownership, obviously, no remorse. Well, I'm sure there was remorse, but there was no ownership. So I couldn't, that was a pill I couldn't swallow. There was a willingness. I'm going to say there was a willingness to do the work, but it wasn't really. It was more of the appearance of doing the work, but not actually doing the work. Do you know what I mean? Like we were going to like couples therapy and having these sessions, and he was like showing up disgruntled and whatever, like, oh, I'm going to have to be here. Right? But he wasn't actually doing the work. It was just to say, well, I'm going to counseling, so what more do you want from me? Right? And then, is the relationship a safe zone? Absolutely not. We were both wildly emotionally immature, and we could not have an emotionally mature conversation about what we were feeling at all. I was of the, again, either the what's it called? Go, have like this big, like emotional outburst modality, to shutting down completely and pretending to be in happy denial. He would, shut down completely and not talk about it until he would explode one day because he couldn't take it anymore. And so we had all of these were like, I was going to say like, not a check mark. They were like an X in the box, like on all of them. X, 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 X. We did not stand a chance based on this. So knowing now, had I known then what I know now, I would have left. I would have left because there was really no coming back from that, given the situation that we were in at the time. Now, if you're in a situation, I'll give you some other examples. If you're in a situation, where your guy cheated on you, he was drunk one night, he was out with his buddies, there was this chick, whatever, things got hot and heavy in the back of his pickup truck, whatever the story is. I'm actually, my friends could kill me. I won't say her name. But anyway, it was a long time ago too. This was this situation is over and done with decades ago. But so they got hot and heavy in the back of a pickup truck, and he was weird for a couple of weeks and not looking you straight in the face, and finally you put two and two together and you called him out, and he's like, fuck, I did. It happened. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That still stings. I'm not saying it doesn't. It still stings. But I do believe people can come back from that. I really do. And I think that, again, is there remorse? Right? He's owned it. He's owned up to it, even though you had to kind of call him out first. But still, he owned it, right? Let's give him that. He owned it. There's definitely remorse. Next thing you want to ask yourself, is he willing to do the work to repair the damage, to build the trust back, right? Can we talk about it openly? Can we talk about the uncomfortable feelings that are coming up on both sides, right? Then I really do think that you can come back from that. I may have a lot of men haters commenting below, no, one's a cheater, always a cheater, blah, blah, blah. Fuck that. We're all human. People F up. It's going to happen. Not it's going to happen, but it does happen. It's natural. We're only human. We make mistakes. Let people make mistakes and then decide what's right for you. Now, again, I'm telling you, you can come back from that. That doesn't mean you have to. If it's a deal breaker for you, walk away. If you can't come back, if you think, no, you know what, based on where I'm at right now, I don't think I can come back from this. I don't think I can do the work to repair the damage. Then that's your decision. Right? This guy's been having a pattern of cheating, right? If he cheated on his ex and the ex before and the ex before that, honey, walk. Don't even give him another chance. Just keep fucking walking. Because in that situation, yeah, of course, he can change. That's not to say that he will never change. He can change, but he has to want to change. You cannot make him. And if he's not if he's not owning up to it or showing remorse or, willingness to do the work and to communicate and blah, 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 then you have your answer. And you know what, honestly, if they have a habit of cheating, there's something deeper going on there. It's not even about you anymore, and when those pains come up, those triggers come up, it ain't even about you, honey. It's never about you. It's never about whether or not you're good enough. It usually has everything to do with how good enough they feel. And when they don't feel good enough, it's almost like a dopamine hit, right? Usually. Listen, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just saying this is what I've seen, right? But, a lot of times there's distance in a relationship. People take each other for granted. Life gets busy. Things get stressful. We're not, as intimate as we used to be. We don't talk like we used to. We don't, maybe there's an emotional disconnect. Maybe they were, there's 1,000 reasons why people cheat, you guys. And it's not all so cookie cutter. It's very complex. So here's my advice to you. These are my kind of questions that I would ask yourself to really assess your situation, whether or not you should stay or go. And you know what? If you're really having a hard time deciding, seek out a relationship counselor. Go to couples counseling. See what they say. Maybe go out, if they're not willing to go with you, maybe you go and speak to someone and have the conversation, weigh the options, weigh the different options that you have in front of you and on what you need to do to approach this from your most empowered place. And never let anyone tell you what you should or shouldn't do, right? You always have the power to make a decision that is aligned for you. Even if it's not something that other people would agree with, what is aligned for you is up to you. Did I make the best decision back in the day? No, I didn't. Was it aligned for me at the time? Yeah, it was actually. Because even though it was painful, and I wish I had those 7 years back and I hadn't wasted them, you know what? I learned a lot. And I wouldn't be the person that I am today had I not gone through that experience. So it's very important to honor where you're at and what you feel, what feels like the aligned thing for you to do. And that is how you take your power back from these kinds of situations, okay? So remember, love yourself the way you want to be loved, and I promise you will be. And if you're ready to create a massive up-level in your relationships, click the link below this podcast in the show notes and book a 90-minute intensive with me. These are powerful sessions where we will get laser focused to create massive change and transformation in your relationships and your life. And if you've got a question, or if there's anything you're curious about or dying to know, hit me up at maria@thefemcoach.com. Who knows, you just might inspire the next episode of the Femcast. Last but not least, if you love this episode, please, 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 please leave a positive rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this episode. That is all for now, you guys. Until next time, massive love.